We're kicking off a series today called Trending. And if you spend any time at all on social media, then you know that when something's trending online, everyone's talking about it.
One of the cool things about some trending topics online is that they're causing a lot of people to come together and find something in common with each other. But of course, there are some trending topics that are also causing some people to become more and more divided. And one of the topics that causes a lot of division in our world is the one we're talking about today, race.
Now, before we get going, let's first talk about the difference between race and ethnicity. In the Bible, God created one human race, and the groups of people, the tribes and nations that developed out of that one human race were ethnicities. In our modern day, race and ethnicity are defined and understood a little differently than how it's explained in the Bible. Let's see if we can help you understand what I mean.
By today's definition, race is typically seen as the biological characteristics of a person. Race is something you were born with. It can't be changed. It's kind of like the starburst in these 3 jars. We've got red, pink, and orange. So let's say I randomly gave everyone in this room one of these 3 flavors. You couldn't pick what flavor I gave you, and you couldn't switch out flavors with your friends. You are stuck with whatever flavor you ended up with. That's similar to race.
Now, ethnicity, by today's definition, is different than race. Ethnicity is considered the culture of a group of people, which usually revolves around their geography. It can include their language, their heritage, their religion, and customs, and it can develop and change over time.
Sometimes race and ethnicity overlap and go hand in hand, while other times they're completely separate from each other. It can get confusing. So to keep it simple, we'll use the word race during our talk today as a broad term to include both.
Now, some of you probably think about race a lot. It's something that impacts you daily and has shaped many of your life experiences. But others of you may not think about race very often at all. Whether race is a topic that you're familiar with or one that you don't come across regularly, this is still true. Race matters.
And you guys, if race matters, then talking about it matters too. But I think we can all agree that it can be a really hard conversation to have. Why? Well, I think people tend to struggle when talking about race for 3 main reasons. One, it makes us uncomfortable. We feel a little bit awkward to say anything at all, and so we just avoid the subject altogether.
And 2, we simply don't know what to say. Maybe like me, you've wanted to have some conversations about race, but you can't seem to find the right words to start the conversation. Maybe you've wanted to ask questions, but you're worried about asking them the right way.
And 3, we don't want to make anyone upset or angry. I think this one is huge. So many of us have probably thought about saying something or asking a question in the past, but all it takes is one quick glance at your TV or social media feed to see that many people aren't finding it easy to agree on the subject of race. It makes people angry or hurts their feelings, and we definitely don't want to do either one of those things.
Chances are you can probably relate to one, if not all 3 of those things, because they're what keep us from being able to have the conversations that we want and need to have about race. So before we dive any deeper into the discussion, let me give you a few words that I hope will not only help us learn something about the subject, but will give us a better idea of what to say when we start having conversations about race. And those words are bias, racism, and prejudice.
To start, let's think about these starbursts. Now remember, each one of you has one of these 3 flavors. Now, I love the pink ones personally. Anybody else with me? I think they're the most delicious flavor of all the other starburst flavors. So, what if I gave everyone who has a pink starburst a whole pack of some other candy? But to all of the people who had orange or red starbursts, sorry, I love the pink ones the most. So you're out of luck.
Now, if you've got a red or an orange, you're probably thinking, that's totally unfair. Well, you're right, it is. And there's actually a word for it, bias. A bias is a preference or leaning towards something or someone, and we all have them in one way or another. So when we have a racial bias, it means that we have a preference or opinion about someone based solely on their race. When all other things are equal, someone is chosen or not chosen only because of their race. So for example, let's say 2 kids try out for the school band. They're both equally talented and deserving to be in the band, but one is chosen over the other simply because of their race. That's a racial bias at work.
Now, for all of you with red Starbursts, what if you thought the red flavor was the best Starburst flavor ever created? And you thought that because of your flavor, you deserve special treatment, and that the people with orange and pink Starbursts, they're beneath you. They're inferior because of their flavor. And what if you didn't like other people unless they have red Starbursts like yourself, and you don't want to hang out with or get to know someone with a pink or an orange flavor?
This is similar to racism. Racism is the judgment, discrimination, or hatred directed towards someone of a different race. Racism is usually based on the belief that your race is superior or better than the race of someone else. So when you hear things in the news and online about people who hurt other people because they don't believe their race has value, that's an example of racism in our world.
And finally, let's talk about the ones with orange Starbursts. What if you thought that everyone with red Starbursts believes they're the best? So you've decided that they're all mean and judgmental. And what about those with pink Starbursts? Well, what if you thought they're all entitled and unappreciative of the extra candy they were given today? You aren't friends with anyone with red or pink Starbursts, and you haven't gotten to know any of them personally. You just jump to conclusions and form thoughts about them without any facts. This is similar to prejudice.
Prejudice is when opinions, beliefs, or feelings are formed about a person or a group of people without facts and knowledge. So for example, say you meet someone for the first time, and you don't know anything about them other than what they look like on the outside. But still, you have negative thoughts about who they are. Rather than base your opinion on actually getting to know them as a person, you base it on what you think you know about them because of their race. That's prejudice.
Okay, so what's the importance of knowing these words? Well, I think that because race is such a trending topic in our world, it's important for us to know words like racial bias, racism, and prejudice so that we can better talk about race and understand our very own views on the subject.
Which brings me back to what I said earlier. Race matters. Maybe you've come face to face with racism, racial bias, and prejudice in your life. Or maybe you haven't thought a whole lot about any of it. No matter what your experiences with and thoughts about race are, race matters. Not just because it's a trending topic, but because I think God cares about it too. And if we believe in God, then I think that means we care about the things He cares about. And that includes race.
So what do we do to find a solution for our questions related to race? Well, I think we have to start by changing our perspective. When it comes to seeing other people, we have to start seeing them through God's lens instead of our own.
What's that lens? Well, let's start by taking a look at what the Bible has to say about it. Paul, one of the leaders of the early church, gave an idea. For you are all children of God through faith in Christ Jesus. And all who have been united with Christ in baptism have put on Christ, like putting on new clothes. There is no longer Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus.
Here, Paul reminded us that in Christ we are all one. Race or class or gender or anything else doesn't separate us from one another. Regardless of our differences on the outside, we can come together in unity because we are alike on the inside, children of God.
Paul wasn't trying to say that race isn't good or isn't important. He was saying that as followers of Jesus, we also have a new identity. And our identity is in God, not in the labels that we as society have put on race. The labels and divisions and biases and prejudices we've created in this world are not from God. But oneness, that is from God. And that's the lens through which He wants us to see one another.
Now, I think it's important to know that when Paul said one, he didn't mean same. Because I think if we're going to be honest, sometimes a lot of us prefer sameness over oneness. When we're all the same, we don't have to worry about things like racial bias, or racism, or prejudice. And that makes life just a little bit easier. But God didn't create us to be the same. He created us to be different from one another, and He called our differences good. So when we strive to be the same, we miss out on so much of the goodness of God's creation.
Instead of seeing ourselves as same, I want to encourage you to see yourselves as one. And that oneness comes from the way we are made. Take a look at this verse in Genesis. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them.
God is the ultimate creator of all life. And as this verse tells us, we're made in his image. All of us. And if we are made in the image of the creator, that means everything about us, our differences included, is a reflection of God. In other words, we all reflect the image of God.
It's kind of like these Starbursts that we talked about earlier. There are a bunch of different flavors of Starbursts, each unique and special in their own way. But at the end of the day, they're all Starbursts. The different flavors just make the candy even better.
And that's what I want you to remember about us. Our diversity unites us because we all reflect the image of God. When we believe each of us is made in God's image, we can celebrate our differences. We don't need everyone to look exactly the way we do because together, differences and all, we reflect God. We are one made perfect in the image of God.
Now, some of you maybe haven't quite figured out how you feel about this whole God thing, and that's okay. No matter where you stand with your faith, I think we can all agree on the value of other people, right? And when we believe that everyone has equal value and begin to celebrate our differences, we can start to see that we really are one.
Okay, so with all of that in mind, the question is this: what can we do to help us navigate the topic of race? I think there are 3 big steps we can take to start moving in the right direction in our day-to-day lives. 1, our thoughts. Since our thoughts ultimately drive our actions, let's start with paying more attention to our thoughts about race. We want to make sure that our thoughts are in the right place, meaning we believe that we're all united and made in the image of God.
This week, commit to examining your first thoughts when you connect with people who are different from you. Pay attention when someone brings up a topic about race. Take just a 10-second pause and use that moment to figure out what you're thinking. Maybe even ask yourself why you're thinking what you're thinking, especially if your first thought is negative.
2, our conversations. We want to make sure that we're more open to positive, healthy conversations about race so that we can learn more from others. If an opportunity presents itself, start a conversation with a trusted friend or a small group leader or an adult in your life to learn more about race in this country or in our world.
But keep in mind that the way that some authority figures in your life think and talk about race may not always be accurate. Hold up the things you hear in conversation to the truth you learned today. Is what they're saying supporting the belief that we're all made in the image of God? Or is it saying something completely different?
And remember, the goal of the conversation should always be unity. So if you find yourself in a conversation that's promoting something else, pay attention to that too. If the conversation isn't healthy, helpful, and respectful to others, find a way to remove yourself from the conversation or speak up. You can say something like this: "Can you help me understand something?" Or, "I'm hoping to learn about differences in people and I have an awkward question. You are someone I trust, admire, and feel safe with. So can I ask you?" Or maybe, "I'd love to learn more about people who are different than me, but it's such an awkward thing to talk about. Can we be a safe place to ask weird questions?"
And 3, our relationships. We can make deeper connections and develop friendships with people who are of a different race than our own. Like, make a point this week to try and engage with someone who isn't like you. Maybe sit with them at lunch or talk to them at school or simply say hello in the hallway. It's simple, but it's a place to start.
And if your personal situation doesn't allow you to actually reach out to someone who's different from you, you can take a step in the right direction by watching movies that actually depict people who are of a different race than you are in a positive light. Or you can reach out to someone who is different than you for other reasons. Maybe they have different beliefs than you, or they speak another language, or they have a completely different personality than you have. All of these are great starting points to building relationships and learning about people who aren't just like you.
I know we covered a lot today. I know this topic isn't always an easy one to talk about or understand, but I really do believe that it's important. I believe God cares about all of us and that He created us perfectly unique from each other. I believe that we all reflect the image of God. And my hope is that not only will you believe that, but you'll let that be the foundation for new thoughts, new conversations, and new relationships as well. So as we close today, I want you to think about this question. What's one question I have about race?